Can you believe it's been nearly 6 years since TVS first launched the RR 310 in India? Now, to their credit, they've constantly evolved the bike over the years, but there's been no second model on that platform for TVS until now.
This is the RTR 310, and as the name suggests, it's the naked version of the RR 310. Now, TVS has taken their time, but the good news is this is not just a naked version. In fact, there's a lot more going on with this bike. Since this bike is effectively the naked version, let's talk about the style. This is a good looking machine. It has a great sense of proportions. I like the headlamp. It is a little large, but it's pointy, angular, and TVS tells us that that is a very powerful LED headlamp. We haven't had a chance to try it yet, but they say this is one of the most powerful units out there. Over at the side, you've got a nicely sculpted fuel tank and these panels down here, which do remind me of the Ducati Streetfighter. In fact, the whole silhouette is really nicely balanced. You've got a step seat at the back. It's a muscular looking motorcycle. And I like what they've done with the rear as well, because they moved the hugger down here. So when you're following the motorcycle from the back, all you see is a clean tail section, and that looks good. The one familiar thing is the exhaust, which leads us on to the fact that the engine is quite similar, but we'll get to that in a bit. The quality and finish details are also quite nice, and this aluminium composite subframe really looks good. It's the first bike in India to offer that, at least an Indian-made motorcycle. The KTM 390 Duke will bring it very soon, but the Apache has beaten it to the punch. Now, that's the style. Here's how the ergonomics feel. The seat height is just about 800 mm, and we find that it fits a bunch of different riders quite well. The footpeg position is reasonably sporty, not too aggressive, and the handlebar is nice and wide. There is a slight lean down, it gives you a sense of involvement, but this is quite a comfortable motorcycle. However, that mainly applies on the road. If you try taking this bike out to the track and you try riding it like a track motorcycle, you'll find that the feet ergonomics are a little cramped, there isn't much space to move around, and when you hit this bump stop at the back, it feels quite hard. This is not really a track motorcycle. We'll get more onto that on the handling aspect, but it is a fun bike. Now, TVS really knows how to set up a good chassis, and that applies here as well. The main frame, it's a steel trellis unit. It's effectively the same as the RR 310, so no real changes to the steering geometry. The subframe, of course, is different, but the suspension also is quite similar. The spring and damping rates are a little different for this bike. TVS tells us they're a little softer, but overall, the feel is quite familiar. Now, the bike we have here has the BTO options. It's got the adjustable suspension, so we'll have to see what it's like to ride back at home. And we also need to see what the baseline non-adjustable suspension is like. But for now, this suspension feels quite nice. The same applies for the brakes. They're effectively the same as the RR 310. The feel is very similar, but if you go for the highest spec BTO version of the RTR, you will get some more advanced ABS features, which we'll get to in a bit. Now let's talk about that engine. Now, on paper, this engine is quite familiar, same bore and stroke, same CC, but TVS has worked on it quite a bit. It now has a bigger airbox, the ECU has been retuned, and the exhaust is different. The effect is that it has a little more power, now 35.6 horsepower and 28.7 Newton meters, both small increments over the RR 310. You probably want to hear what it sounds like, so let's give you a listen. What I can tell you is that is now a cleaner, tighter sound. It doesn't sound as harsh or thrashy as the old RR 310, and that is always a good thing. TVS is continuously trying to make improvements when it comes to that. Now, this has always been a fun and capable engine, but it's not without its flaws. As you're probably aware, one of the biggest issues with the RR 310 motor is that it has vibrations. And unfortunately, that really hasn't changed on this bike either. Between the 5,000 and 7,000 RPM mark, the vibrations get quite strong, particularly at 6,000 RPM, where you'll feel them in the bars, the seat, and the foot pegs. The problem here is that 6,000 RPM is where you'll spend a lot of your time. It's about 100 kph. And what TVS has done is they've given the bike a bigger rear sprocket, which has effectively shortened the gearing. In the city, that's great fun, you get more rapid acceleration, but out on the highway, it feels like the bike is really revving quite high, there's a lot of noise, and you're sitting in that vibration zone quite often. If you want to tour on this motorcycle, it might make sense to go back to the sprockets that you'll find on the RR 310. My bigger issue with this engine, however, is the throttle calibration. It's a little choppy on on-off transitions, which has now become quite a common thing in emissions-compliant vehicles. It's hard to get a smooth throttle while also meeting emissions norms. The issue here, however, is that when you close the throttle, the bike continues to accelerate for a little duration of time. It's something we see in EVs and it's not a very nice feeling. On the RTR, it's more pronounced in urban mode. You're riding with traffic, someone slows down in front of you, you close the throttle, but you continue to move ahead a little longer than you would have anticipated. And that's not a nice feeling. It's something TVS needs to work on. Aside from that issue, this is a very fun motorcycle to ride. Out on the street, it feels agile, it feels reactive, but it also feels absolutely trustworthy. You can throw it into a corner and it does exactly what you ask. It also comes on some very nice Michelin Road 5 tires. But like I said, on the track it does run into a few ergonomic issues. There isn't much space to move around, especially for your feet. You will start grinding the foot pegs quite early and it just doesn't like being ridden too hard. Ride it quickly, you'll enjoy it around the corners, you'll probably have a nice time at a track as well, but don't take it too seriously. This is more of a road sport motorcycle. So that's how the RTR 310 rides, but there's also a whole lot for us to talk about when it comes to features because TVS has really pushed the game forward in this regard. If you go for the higher spec models, you get a lot of functionality, but we'll tell you what comes as standard on the base bike as well. You get a 5-inch TFT display, you get basic traction control, basic cruise control, and it functions quite well. The traction control particularly is really smooth on the road. It's not like those budget systems on more affordable bikes that cut the power intrusively. You can even whack the throttle open on loose gravel and it smoothly propels you forward. However, as nice as that TC system is on the road, when you bring it onto the track, it's a little too intrusive and you're better off turning the system off. Now, speaking of the track, the RTR 310 comes with 5 riding modes as standard and you get the track mode in the base version as well. These modes aren't user customizable, but you can cycle through them to get different levels of power or different levels of intervention from the safety systems. With that out of the way, let's get to the more complex features that you'll get if you opt for the BTO packs. Effectively, the bike gets a 6-axis IMU and that gives it cornering traction control, cornering ABS, and TVS has even created something called cornering cruise control where you can ride around in cruise control and when it detects that the bike is leaning over, it will reduce the speed for you. This is a feature that will probably work in very few scenarios. You need to have the right speed, you need to be going around the right kind of corners, but it's nice to see that TVS is trying to innovate. The really cool feature, however, quite literally, is the heated and cooled seat. Now this is a world first. TVS has come up with a technology where you can either cool or heat the seat. It works using a physical phenomenon called the Peltier effect. It's quite a complex thing. Go online, look it up. I'm not qualified to explain that to you, but I can tell you how it works. Now, we're riding in Thailand, nobody wants to ride with a heated seat, but the cooling function is quite interesting. It works when the engine is above 2000 RPM and when you're riding in slow-moving traffic, especially when you turn the system on, you really feel a gentle draft of cool air. It's a wonderful feeling, but it doesn't last that long because you invariably get used to the sensation. Turn it off, let the bike get hot again, turn the system on and you'll appreciate it once more. Out on the highway at higher speeds, we didn't really notice it, but in the city, this is a really nice thing to have. There are, however, a couple of things that you need to consider. If you're someone who likes sitting at the back of the seat, you will be quite comfortable. But if you're a shorter rider or you just generally like being right up against the fuel tank, you will feel those hard elements in the seat and that does get quite uncomfortable. Another really interesting feature is the dynamic headlamp. Now this bike gets a dynamic tail light. It's something that we see in international big bikes where you brake really hard and the brake lamp flashes to warn someone behind you. The dynamic headlamp, however, is a new concept. Cross 80 kilometers an hour and the intensity goes up by 1 level. Cross 100 and it goes up once again. If you want to turn it off, the system basically sets itself in the middle level of intensity. Again, it's something we really want to try and it's quite innovative. And finally, there's also a bi-directional quick shifter, and this is by far the smoothest, nicest system that we've seen in an Indian bike so far. It also works at quite low RPM, and it's a system that you'll want to keep on because it's good fun to use. Now, speaking about the bi-directional quick shifter, it's only available in the mid and top level variants, and now is a good time to start talking about pricing. Depending on how you look at the RTR 310, it's either quite a well-priced motorcycle or a rather expensive one. The base variant without the quick shifter starts at 2.43 lakhs. The next level comes at about 2.57 and above that is the yellow color that comes at about 2.64. However, if you really want all the fancy features, you have to go for the BTO optional packs. The dynamic pack brings you the adjustable suspension that's preload and compression and rebound in the front and rebound and preload at the rear. It also gives you a brass coated chain and a tire pressure monitoring system. The really clever 6-axis IMU enabled safety features and the cool seat will come with a dynamic Pro pack that then costs you 22,000 rupees. If you want the top Sepang blue color, that's another 10,000 rupees. So if you factor all this in, you're now looking at a bike that costs over 3 lakh rupees. That is quite a lot of money for a segment that is really hotting up. On the one hand, we have the amazingly priced Triumph Speed 400 that undercuts the base RTR by 10,000 rupees, although the RTR has more features like the cruise control and the TFT display. On the other hand, you're now above the 3 lakh rupee mark for the fully loaded bike, and that's probably where the next-gen KTM 390 Duke will be. This 300 to 400cc sport naked category is getting really hot in India this year, and I think it's going to be a really exciting comparison review when we inevitably get all these bikes together.